16, and he passed away on April 2nd at 6 minutes to 8 in the evening in Beacon Hill Lodge, West Vancouver. He was 75 years old. Bernie himself didn't want to live the way he was. In the video you are to see he was suffering from dementia, but it was not as obvious as it would become. This is the Bernie we all remember and was taken at Bruce York's 65th birthday party in 1989 by Helen O'Shaughnessy. Shortly before he died, Bernie was reliving his role as shop steward. He asked me one day what rate Peter Samuels was on. Going along with the conversation, I replied, about $20. Is that too much for him? I asked. Bernie replied, no, I don't suppose so.
Under duress, yeah.
Modest.
Do you think I'm modest?
Modest.
What was I accused of there? Being modest? He got sued, yes, sued for breach of promise. He took Mary walking down a dell. He said, now dearie, don't you tell. Mary went right home and told her mother. Ma told Pa. Pa then told the brother. The brother went and told the preacher, and the preacher told the wedding bell. If you take a girl out walking, never take a girl named Sue. Never take a girl named Maud or Carrie, 'cause that's the kind of girl you'll have to marry. If you take a girl out walking down a little shady dell, always take a girl named Daisy. Why? Because daisies don't tell.
Thank you, Bernie. Libby?
This is where we his wife says, no it isn't. No. And there was a bed there somewhere. It was absolutely jammed full of furnishings and stuff that his brother wrote. I think he was a bit of a collector too.
Yeah,
he liked something he wanted to keep.
I think when Hilux is always reading and
maybe on the concrete
that'll work.
He was working on the slab, bending these huge frames that they used, which become part of the hull of the ship. And he was a real expert at this, and he always wanted to do them to perfection. And during that period of time, there was a change taking place in the union, and Bernie, with many of us, helped to build a new union known as the Marine Workers and Boilermakers. And he played an active role with us in the shop steward movement, which was one of the important groups that helped to give the leadership support they needed in order to make the union a reality. And Bernie, he was dedicated to the working class. He always defended the workers regardless. And further, Bernie played a role on the executive over the number of years. He also was a vice president. There was some of the interesting things that I just want to remark was Bernie liked to socialize, and during that period when Bill Stewart was still alive, we used to meet at Bill's place, and of course there was always humorous moments in which one tried to outdo the other, and of course there was always the bagpipes that were around at close hand, and a guy by the name of Alec Chalmers, he would be there, and he'd be playing Bill's favorite Scotch tunes. and the first thing you'd know, there'd be a a bit of a dance going and some fancy footwork between Bernie and Bill. One trying to outdo the other. It was many an evening that we were there that we had some real entertainment. Bernie was also a delegate to the Labour Council for many years. He played a role as a delegate. He was a very capable debater, and he was dedicated to the working class as such. He never veered off all his life. And I think that he should be remembered as one that has made a contribution towards the trade union movement and the working class as a whole.
That was Mickey's just around.
Video camera. That many years or oh yeah. Oh my goodness. A piece of cheese. This is my husband, Cal. This is my cousin, Heather. We're trying to get margaritas.
Tastes a little bit different. Okay, no problem. Okay, we're
on the job there, Peter.
Hey, I mean, you know.
And then we have a couple of other people who are going to add a few notes on Bertie's life as a student and as a soccer player, etc. We have Gus McSween here who was a teenager with Bernie, and then followed by that there would be Bill Scott from the Marine and Boilermakers Union, who's going to give a just a few short words about Bernie's history as a trade unionist and a member of the shipyards, etc. Morning, because I think Bernie would have wanted us to all have a drink and a beer.
I'd love to stand up in the corner there.
Yeah, Bernie would add me over the dunce cap on. Being during the First World War in Chester, England, which is a tough working class area south of Liverpool. And he was the oldest of 5 children. Him and his brother Ronnie were born in England, and then the family moved to Canada. And his 3 sisters, Betty Lou and Brenda, who's here, and Dory, sorry, were all born in Canada. Throughout the 1920s and into the 30s, during Bernie's schooling year or schooling history, he traveled Canada extensively, part of making a living with his father. Him and his brother Ronnie traveled across Canada back and forth selling magic soap cakes and gambling and various things to make a living for the family. And Bernie, during that period, he says that he went to 42 different schools. I know it's a pile. Maybe in reality it might be 35, but I know he always insisted there was 42 schools, which are elementary, junior secondary, senior secondary, San Francisco, Toronto, Vancouver, in every place across the country. Part of this kind of nomadic gypsy lifestyle of selling soap cakes and various potions to people across Canada during the 20s and 30s to make a living. Brought him to a situation where he's probably in Guinness's Book of World Records as the person who went to more schools than anybody else. But it was an interesting lifestyle. He always cherished the abilities of his father to sell these cakes and to have gambling at night, and enter Bernie and Ronnie into races, which he would bet heavily on, and which he knew they were the quickest at the first 40 or 50 feet and would be able to pull off weights or off the bet, etc. And then on top of that, his dad, in order to encourage them to participate in the selling of the soap cakes and the various trinkets to people across Canada, he would pay them wages to give them some incentive, and then he'd play poker with them at night and win it back. Carry on to the next town and find some more customers. Part of making a living through the 20s and 30s was when Bernie was a teenager. In 1933, his father, who was always an avid sports fanatic as far as both a participant and especially watching and encouraging Ronnie and Bernie to participate in it, he had Bernie heavily involved in wrestling. And Bernie did quite well at this. He was short in stature and powerful, and he could easily get in on guys and take them down with a leg takedown, and he had lots of strength to do that. And he was given the name the Vancouver Flash. And in fact, I have a photograph here. There's several photographs that I'm going to circulate that people can just look at of Bernie in his younger days or at different periods in his life. And this is one of Bernie as the Vancouver Flash. And it was about a year ago, I guess. I was up at Salmon Arm. It was a year ago, March, and I was in Salmon Arm, and Bernie had my father, who's about 50, I guess about 60, all twisted up like a pretzel on the kitchen floor there. He used to show my father these moves that the Vancouver Flash used to make. And one time they were quite troubled for money in Toronto. And the Vancouver Flash had a history of winning. So his father entered Bernie into some bouts under the alias of Barney Kelly. And this was done commonly. Once you wrestled a while and had some experience, you could take on any other amateur wrestler and win handily if it was their first time in the ring. And after a while, no one would bet for you. And so in order to increase the odds, Bernie was entered under an alias as a total farmhand, a greenhorn, who never fought before. And they hid his real identity as the Vancouver Flash, and he was entered as this greenhorn, Barney Kelly. And he was against a great big fellow who was from down in Leamington, or one of the farming areas, who was supposed to be some other greenhorn. And his dad had bullshitted it around and got the situation going where everybody thought that Bernie was the real greenhorn, and they had something like 7-to-1 odds that Bernie would win this. And anyways, they went into the ring. The other fellow was really big, and he really cleaned up on Bernie. And I said to Bernie, well, what was the name of the other guy? I said, well, Bernie said, well, he was pulling off the same stunt we were pulling off. He was an experienced fighter out of New York. And but he was going under an alias also. And I said to Bernie, well, what was his alias? And he said it was Donnie Brooks. It was, my father, my parents we just rolled in the kitchen floor laughing, just thinking of that situation, because it was really kind of an underhanded situation, just the whole ability to try and make a living in the 30s and the various schemes that people pulled off to just to make money and to survive for another week. During the 30s, Bernie traveled extensively across Canada and had a real love and appreciation for the country. That included Quebec, where he'd taken some French in high school, and when he went to Quebec and tried to speak French, he was always given food and a place to stay at night in Montreal and in other places in Quebec, and always really appreciated the hospitality of the people of Quebec. During the 30s, he was thrust into the same situation of a lot of other people, where he spent time in relief camps and riding freight trains and going back and forth across the country to make a living in any way possible. And also, throughout the latter part of the 30s, he was introduced into the shipyard scene in Vancouver as a teenager out of high school to gain work whenever it was available. And I'm not going to touch on that. I'm going to have some of the other people speak up and say things that they want. In general, the Depression affected Bernie's his manners and his psychology the way it affected every Canadian. I just finished reading the book The Great Depression by Pierre Burton, which I recommend for anybody to read. It's just a beautiful book that talks about just the incredible hardship that people went through in the 30s. And there's Pierre Burton notes that coming out of the 30s, some people were skinflints or tight with their money, and were lived a tough life long after the Depression was over, and other people learned to kind of face reality to get on with life. But Bernie was like that. He, in fact, I think if he hadn't married Audrey and dealt with finances more realistically, probably Alan and I would be standing here with flat pants on today. I remember for a short period after Heather and I were married, or just before we were married, we lived in the basement of this house, and I'd come up to the fridge to get something for supper, or maybe to raid the fridge, and there'd always be a bowl with 2 carrot dices in it, or maybe a cup with 1 strawberry in it, etc. And that was Bernie's trademark. I remember one time Bernie and I went over to Gabriel Island to do some work on the cabin over there, and we had supper, and we had a few beer at night, and we were sitting there chatting together, and Bernie recited a story about a fellow that he'd run into in Medicine Hat in the Depression, and the water was tight, and there was no place to stay, and there was no food, and no work, and this fellow showed Bernie how to take a glass of water and have a complete bath in it. Take a glass, and Bernie demonstrated this to me, and it was just one of the traits that Bernie remembered from all the characters that he ran across the 30s, how you take the first bit to your face and then do the rest of your body and your hair, and save the end for the lower parts. He demonstrated this to me. That it's just a scream. We had a few years ago. It was just one of those magical moments that Bernie had remembered from somebody 60 years ago, and it was still prominent in his memory. What else do I have here?
I didn't know that either.
Anyways, on with Bernie's history. In the early 40s, he married for the first time, and he had a daughter, Anne McKenzie, who is here somewhere today. She's over behind the sink there. And then later on in life, he married for a second time in 1955 to Audrey, and they had 3 children, and 2 of them, Heather and Alan, are here today. As I mentioned earlier, he worked in the shipyards from the time he was a teenager till he was about 65 years of age. And but that was broken in the period when he went back to university in the early 60s. When he was 42 years of age, he went back to university and got his teaching certificate. and the family moved to Prince George for 2 years, and he taught, he was a librarian, and he taught English, and he taught home ec in the early 60s, and if you have a chance, you should go through through Bernie's bedroom, where there's a display of photographs, and there's a full-page picture out of the Prince George paper that shows Bernie teaching home ec, which in the 1960s in Prince George was probably pretty revolutionary. Surrounded by tight-fisted. Yeah, but I think that whole period was something that everybody agrees. Bernie really enjoyed going to university, the academic stimulation, the debate on campus in the early 60s, his further development and interest in English literature, which was Bernie's hallmark. Knowing the language, crossword puzzles, lyrics, folklore, the history of words, and all of the English poets like Yeats and whatever. You can just list them for 20 or 30 minutes, I guess, all of the English poets that Bernie used to recite the different works of.
Hey, he could quote them in a minute.
Yeah, he quote them in a minute. So I think that's probably one of the saddest things with Bernie's passing is just the loss of all of those small musical jingles and poems and old stories, etc., that have been passed down to him through the decades, which none of us have recorded, unfortunately. On the home front, after they returned back, well, even before they went to Prince George, Bernie, because he worked in the shipyards and was close to home, was the main cook, and Audrey, who worked for 28 years with a period broken in the middle, worked at the Fishermen's Union in Vancouver, wasn't able to get home before Bernie, so Bernie was kind of the main cook between Mondays and Fridays, and he had just a half a dozen main courses. There was wieners and beans and macaroni and cheese that were appreciated by the kids most of all when they got home from school. And then there was the ones that were lower down on the menu, which were Bernie's stew, and it didn't go over really well. And there was Bernie's bubble and squeak, which was the potatoes and turnips and carrots and whatever meat was left over, all hashed together and refried, and probably left for another night to be refried again.
Is that what you did? You taught them in Prince George?
No.
But we've had a lot of fun putting together this little dissertation. I'll say it wasn't a lot of laughs.
Imagine how well he would fit in Prince George with all the rednecks.
He was just like a sore thumb. He was just like a sore thumb.
Yeah, that's probably true. But some of the major events in Bernie's life was a canoe trip in the late 60s, early 70s with his son Alan through the Bowen Lakes southeast of Prince George. One of the things he always took pride in was the construction and continual work on his cabin over on Gabriel Island. A couple trips to England, a couple trips to Cuba and the Soviet Union, which he enjoyed. And there's pictures on the wall of a number of those different locations. And there was one memorable trip that we were talking about last night, which dealt with a family trip across Canada in 1968, the year after Expo, which Audrey and Heather and Alan and Bernie took part in. Traveled right across to the East Coast, and then Audrey flew back because she had to go to work. And Heather was mentioning that all the way back, Bernie always had a half a dozen beer, driving along merrily and whistling jingles, and basically quite content and going across the prairies, etc., which was definitely an arduous drive, to say the least. And there was one day they noticed that Bernie didn't have any beer at all. He drank, or he drove kind of sipping on a beer on his trip and that, and so when it came on into the later afternoon, Heather and them had picked up on this, and they congratulated Bernie and said, way to go, Dad, you haven't drank all day, and you've been great, etc. And then as time followed on, they wanted to stop and get a refreshment at a store or something like that, but there was nothing open, so it dawned on them it was Sunday, and much to their chagrin and Bernie's chagrin, there was no beer or ice cream or anything to be had on that at all. But Bernie accepted the congratulations. In general, before I pass on the floor to a couple of other friends, just basic some of his closing remarks was that, Bernie a few things that Bernie really liked in life, and one was playing and coaching soccer, which he always was the game which was closest to his heart, from what I can understand. And also golf was a major role, or played a major role as far as entertainment and sport was. And I think we all knew Bernie as the entertainer and as the person which, if you wanted to pull together a group of people and have a party and really engage in some merriment, Bernie was critical to be at that event. I think one of the things that Bernie really held close to his heart was just the camaraderie of fellow workers in the shipyards, and having a beer afterwards, and just on site with 6 or 7 guys heating up beams white hot and shaping them on the forming floors, etc. Was that type of collective effort by workers to pull off a very difficult task was something that he always really appreciated. Reciting poetry, lyrics, puns, singing songs in his little jingles, beer, crosswords, and just exploring English language. Thousands of them, that's right. And just basically exploring the English language and having a good time was what Bernie was all made up of. And it was the things that made him a very special friend and a very special father.
You don't want me to start over?
No, that's okay. That's all right. No.
To Bernie's credit, as Reg has already mentioned, he went back to school later in life, and he took his senior matric, as far as I can remember. Is that right, Audrey? At North Vancouver High School, where the kids were so many years younger than himself. He completed his senior matric and then went on to university. As an athlete, now some people might doubt this. Anyway, with very little to do during the Depression, there were no jobs, nothing, nobody could go to university, nobody could go to school. The youth of the day, including Bernie, occupied themselves with athletic endeavors of some kind or other. Now Bernie took up soccer, or he played soccer. He played Canadian football. Now, if you remember Bernie's height and weight, you wouldn't think that Bernie would be able to play Canadian football. But this was the days before the 6'6" giants and the 200 and 300 pound guys. And Bernie was a good Canadian football player. And let's see now. There's a man right there that can verify that Bernie was also a boxer. Elio, yes, Elio was a great boxer in this game. Bernie was a boxer, wasn't he, Elio?
That's right.
And he was a wrestler. Now, a lot of you wouldn't believe that either. But when I came in today, I saw this picture and I stole it. There is Bernie as a wrestler. There you go. Now, but soccer, I think, was his favorite game. He loved to play soccer. And he played for the first juvenile team in North Vancouver, where he was a member of the first juvenile team in North Vancouver. Now, if you think of today, where there are hundreds and hundreds of juvenile teams on the North Shore, I don't think you can count them. He was a member of this first team, and they had to go to Vancouver for their opposition, and they had a very excellent team. In fact, 2 of the players that played on that team are now in the British Columbia Hall of Fame as soccer players. I speak of Jimmy Spencer and Trevor Hart. Now, Bernie enjoyed playing soccer with these fellas. Now, I'm getting rid of my notes here gradually. In senior, Bernie played for, there were different senior teams in different leagues, and he played for different teams. For a couple of years, he played for North Shore United, and they were a member of the Pacific Coast League at that time. Now, when most sensible soccer players hang up their boots, a group from the North Shore decided to form a fun team for has-beens and never-wases and so on and so forth, just by way of having a little entertainment. Now, one required the proper qualifications to play for this team. You had to be a certain age, you had to be married, you had to have 2 children, and so on and so forth. There was a long list of qualifications. And I know I couldn't make the team because I didn't have 2 children. But Nobby Clark said that he was the manager. Some of you remember Nobby Clark. He said I'd probably never have made the team anyway. So, now despite their age and their unique qualities, they won several championships. They were all actually very good players. Now, games were played on Sunday afternoon, and that was kind of bad. And they included many other game activities. After the game, the odd, suds was clapped and so on and so forth. And turn time was the feature of the day. This is where Bertie honed his skills as an entertainer. Now, turn time quite often went on late into Sunday night. Now, the wives of these players weren't particularly happy with this. So eventually they found they couldn't do anything about it, so they joined them. They went into the dressing room after everybody was in, and they stayed too. Turn time was the big event. Some of them did big work on Monday morning. A few of, as I say, Bernie honed his skills, his entertaining skills during this time. And a few of his, everyone's favorite, you've all heard, I'm sure, boiled beef and carrots. Cabbage, sorry. Henry VIII I am. And I met her in the garden where the praties grow. That was one of his favorites. Bernie, you provided tremendous entertainment to a lot of people. And I know they join with me in thanking you very much, and we'll miss you.
I'd like to call on Bill Scott just to say a couple of words on behalf of the university.
Well, I first met the Keelys
Around the corner right here.
when I arrived in Canada. And it was in the St. Alice Hotel. I had a vociferous Englishman who turned out to be Cease Keely. And I enjoyed his company. I didn't know then, of course, that there was going to be a whole bunch of Keelys I would meet later on. But clearly I think the little man I enjoyed in there, a bit of him is in all of his children. That kind of nature, and a lot of it, certainly it was in Bernie. I always thought of Bernie as being a man of words, and no one was surprised when he disappeared in the 60s to do something about it and go back to school, and so we sort of missed him for about 9 years. The man of words in the Union, it would have been fine if we only had Bernie, but unfortunately we had several who thought they were men of words. And when they got together in a bylaws committee meeting, or in a resolutions committee meeting, we only wanted 6 resolutions. We could be there till midnight, arguing over the words between Bernie Keely, his old friend, sparring partner Bill Stewart, and another North Vancouver gentleman called Reg Bullock. Now, in the beer parlour, of course, Bernie would be holding forth with his English poets, and Bill would always counter with his knowledge of workings of all the Scott. and quotations from Robert Burns. And that went on and on and on. But on the floor of the meeting too, Bullock was particularly long-winded. And he was the kind of speaker who wouldn't move on unless he got just the right word that he needed for this sentence. And Bernie would sit next to him and he would offer him some of his words. And Bullock would resist them to the point of Bernie saying, "For Christ's sake, Bullock, are my words not long enough?" I can remember one night in particular, it took a good 15 minutes to help Bullock find the word sequestered. Sequestered was the word he wanted. Bernie had about 5 words up for him as options before he finally got that one out. Bernie, I believe, certainly did enjoy the camaraderie of his workmates, and that, in a sense, is the essence of trade unions. And it was that underpinning that I believe made him a good trade unionist. His contribution to the union started long before I knew him, and the man of words came in really handy when the retirees decided to do a history of the union. Most of the interviews done by tape were done by Bernie, and he assisted many of the shy and not too well-spoken old-timers in the union to make their contribution, which was encapsulated in the book that is the history of the union. We still have the tapes in the union, and they are maybe something that I should bring back for Andre. It's mostly Bernie's voice on these tapes. I think that I'm going to end there saying that Bernie was one who enjoyed his fellow members, and his contribution to the union was large because he was so connected to his fellow man. Thank you.
Words, and it's kind of fitting. I remember talking to Bernie that he always had a real warmth for every working person, and sometimes politics was secondary, although he liked to have a person with good politics too. But I remember him always saying that working people were always great friends, but it always seemed that Scotch working people with their oratory abilities and their deep brogue were the closest thing to God in Bernie's heart. It's kind of fitting that Gus and Bill have been here today to give us that reminder. Bernie just loved the Scotch language. I'm going to read a short letter in closing, which was I'm not sure what it was, but before I start that, I'm just going to pass around a few more photographs. One is of Bernie in one of his crazy corny poses, of which there's 100 of them. And there's one special one of Bernie celebrating the rites of spring on Gabriel Island, which I'm going to spit on. And, Bernie wasn't bashful in front of the camera. Another picture of Bernie teaching home ec in Prince George, and Bernie with his desire for keeping things and collecting and hoarding and all of that, which I don't know I guess it came out of the Depression. Going through his scraps of stuff the other night, we even found the beard from Alan the first time Alan shaved in 1980. Bernie had meticulously stored in a drawer that I won't circulate this because we're going to lose track of it. It just showed Bernie's love for detail in his family and the special feeling he had for his the card here is a card from Heather. Whenever I think she was a teenager, and most teenagers have run into parents at one time or another, and Heather made this card and give it to her dad. I'm going to read it, and then I'll close after that. It says, "I guess as time goes on, a person goes through different stages of understanding and development. And at this time in my life, I'm beginning to realize and appreciate some of the people in my life. You're one of them with your corny jokes and your crazy dancing, your talent for writing and your imaginative view of art, your soft spot for old times and old people, and your involvement in the community around you, your cheese and onion sandwiches and the noise you make at the dinner table when you smell something good. The way you help me with my table manners and the way you have your heart-to-heart talks with Alan, your love for a date, for a dog who you didn't want to get in the first place, and your speeches at weddings and funerals, your devotion to a job that often wears your nerves thin, and your willingness to work hard, your dishwashing and your pajama bottoms, which are usually falling off, your love for kids and, and your appreciation of the old. It's all you, Dad, but most of all, you have gained my love and respect because you care about people and what happens to them. You're working for a better world for my generation and the generations to come. And with that, we're just having the people to just help
Inside joke. They always have one of those, don't they?
some type of
Brenda, would you like to explain to everybody what the Siki Club is? Can you do it?
You want to explain what the Siki Club was?
Maybe Anne could maybe. Well, I think after a few drinks on a Saturday afternoon, I think at the Army and Navy more than likely, yeah. So I think what happened is that they would have a few drinks and maybe get a bit of a conscience about the fact that, you know, we better see our kids now and again and come down for dinner for Nana soup or something. And, which they did. And Brenda and I, you know, I guess, Brenda, I don't know if you were up there too at that time.
No,
probably not.
I wasn't. I was only 16.
Yeah. And anyway, we'd all get together and they would say, okay, now we've got to get, what we're going to do now is we're going to get a club going here. And we're going to call it the Siki Club, but you have to, there's special things that you have to be able to be in the Siki Club. So we've got minutes of the meeting if anybody wants to see what the requirements were. Then they can do that. This is the back bedroom. And we're really delighted to see those minutes because they go back to 1951. Sandra at the time was only 6. And Brenda was 18, and I guess I was 8. And Robbie would be what, 4? 3 or 4?
Being that it was Bernie, he insisted that I was a member because I had to be the secretary, treasurer, and vice president. And he was the president, that was his full job. The only other crew member was Sandra, who was just a little skirt. And then we allowed a few in that were honorary members. Boys could no vote. After they made applications. And just so that you know, we had national experiment carrot. And we also had a signal. I'd like you all to do the signal and our signal at this time. Pull off right in the middle of Lonsdale and 2nd Street, coming home from work, and I'm coming home from work, and he would just stop right in the middle of the street, Jonathan would swing on this side and go, sing, sing, sing.
What a crazy girl. Then we'd have a bite of the carrot, and we'd all have to have a bite of this carrot, and then we would, as I recall, go down the Sugar Bowl on, right across from George right on. And we only think of a Sunday or a Palm. I mean, oh, okay. Bobby, do you remember any of that?
Very little.
No? So that's Siki Club. Okay.
So I wanted to say, if you get a chance, come on, look at a place for finance or something. Yeah.
Carrie. Soil first. I really don't know why you had it down.
Now, if you had that umbrella up about a foot higher, we'd be able to see behind it.
Up a foot so everybody can see.
There's in the beer sign. How fitting, eh?
Yeah.
He's gonna pour beer on top of it. Jeez. You went right home.
That's Walt Jacobs there, I think, is it?
There's a lot of that.
I came across and they were
Woman could have running on
Very good,
What do you want? Does it make you happy to take her?
Okay, I'm gonna read stop and maybe you can hear my voice. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we're listening.
No?
Those of us that are listening.
The little kind of a poem story that my Uncle Ronnie was, it was his favorite story. And Dad wrote it down, and I'm not the greatest reader, but I'll try my best to put as much bookend in it as I can. And it's called The Green Eye of the Little Yellow God. Okay. There's a one-eyed yellow idol to the north of Kathmandu. There's a little marble cross below the town. And a broken-hearted woman tends the grave of Mad Karoo, and a yellow god forever gazes down. He was known as Mad Karoo by his subs at Kathmandu. He was hotter than they felt inclined to tell. But for all his foolish pranks, he was worshipped in the ranks, and the colonel's daughter smiled upon him as well. He had loved her all along with the passion of the strong, and the fact that she loved him was clear to all. She was nearly 21, and arrangements had begun to celebrate her birthday with a ball. He wrote to her and asked what she would like from Mad Karoo. They met next day as he dismissed his squad. And jestingly she told him that nothing else would do but the green eye of the little yellow god. The night before the dance, Mad Karoo seemed in a trance, and they chaffed him as they puffed on their cigars. But for once he failed to smile, and he sat alone a while, then went out into the night beneath the stars. He returned before the morn, his shirt and tunic torn, and a gash across his temple dripping red. He was patched up right away, and he slept throughout the day, and the colonel's daughter watched beside his bed. He awoke at last and asked if they would send his tunic through. She brought it, and he thanked her with a nod. Then he handed her his present, saying, "That's from Mad Karoo. 'Twas the green eye of the little yellow god." She unbraided poor Karoo in the way that women do, though both her eyes were strangely hot and wet. But she wouldn't take the stone, and Karoo was left alone with the jewel that he'd chanced his life to get. When the ball was at its height on that still and tropic night, she thought of him and hastened to his room. As she crossed the barrack square, she could hear the dreamy air of a waltz tune softly stealing through the gloom. His door was open wide, with the moonlight streaming through. The floor was red and slippery where she trod, and an ugly knife lay buried in the heart of Mad Karoo. 'Twas the vengeance of the little yellow god. There's a one-eyed yellow idol in the north of Kathmandu. There's a little marble cross below the town. And a broken-hearted woman tends the grave of Mad Karoo, and the yellow god forever gazes down.
Audrey has of Bernie